Hello everybody, welcome to this video where I'll be starting the topic of network design and supply chain. Now this will be a series of videos that I'm going to provide to you over a period of weeks. Today we'll talk about the basics of how you design a supply chain network, what goes into designing a supply chain network, and we'll talk about single facility location. That's the plan for today. I might split this up into a couple of videos or maybe 2 or 3 videos depending upon how these go. I could not achieve this last week, but I'll try to keep every video between 10 and 15 minutes, right? So let's talk about supply chain network design and and we'll take it from there. So we have to understand the role of network design, identify the factors, and so on, the trade-offs and all of that. We'll talk about all of that. So what is the role of network design? So a role of network design, there are two main reasons why you design supply chain networks. One is you're trying to, establish a brand new market, right? You're trying to get into a new market, or you're trying to produce a new good or manufacture something brand new. Then you have to design a network for it. So you have to figure out where your raw materials are going to come from, where your final product is going to go, what are all the intermediate steps, and so on. So how many manufacturing plants, cross-docking facilities, distribution centers, where should they be located, what should the capacity of these facilities be, which product should you sell, which market should you sell the products to. Now all of these, it seems like we are making a lot of decisions, but as you will notice as we go through these series of videos, these decisions can sort of be made together because some of the earlier decisions influence the later decisions. For example, decisions of where to place the production facilities might have a huge impact on how you are able to serve your customer locations and so on. So making these decisions together will be very useful, right? So that's the idea of that's the role of network design. Now the other reason, so I said there were two reasons. The second reason to do network design is because you're trying to figure out when your market changes, or if two companies are merging, or the factor cost changes, right? So mergers are a big reasons why a lot of companies redesign networks, and that is something that we're going to talk about extensively. I may not get to it this week. We'll probably do it the next week or the week after, but we'll talk about when you have mergers, how do you merge the supply chains together? What is the optimal way of merging supply chains together, right? So that's also something that we're going to talk about, and that's another reason why you would want to design a brand new network. Moving on. Okay. All right. So what are the factors that influence design decisions, right? The first factor, obviously, you have a strategic, some sort of strategy at the company level. So any factors that trickle down to the supply chain level, those strategic factors are important. Competitive factors are important, obviously. Political factors definitely play a role, especially with supply chain design, because they tend to be go across political boundaries, right? Not just country boundaries, but sometimes state boundaries, even within the United States and so on. So, of course, infrastructure factors. These are all important factors influencing network design, and we'll go over each of these in a second. Now there are other things also, operational things like customer response time, logistics costs, tariffs and incentives, which have recently become very important for us, and same with supply chain risks, right? With COVID and everything around it, supply chain risks have become a very important factor of designing supply chain decisions. So previously, when I talked about the two big reasons why you want to design supply chains, you might also want to redesign supply chains because maybe the tariffs and incentives that you have taken into account don't exist anymore. Maybe the tariff regime is completely different as it is right now. And the same goes with supply chain risks. Maybe your supply chain was not as resilient to the risks that came about during something like the COVID-19 panic. COVID-19 pandemic. So in a situation like that, how do you manage risks in a supply chain? So given that you might want to redesign your supply chain, that's another reason why it is good to look at the design of supply chain and how you do that, right? Okay. So Let's begin again. So there were a few factors that I wanted to talk about. Strategic factors that influence supply chain design is, so strategies are something that are usually done at the company level, right? So the good example that I like to take, and that has been borne out over the years, is that companies like to do things like go to zero carbon footprint or go green or something along those lines, and that might be the strategy that a company has, and it has to now trickle down to the supply chain level. And when it comes down to the supply chain level, you have to design. So, okay, we have a supply chain network that works a certain way. How do we make it carbon neutral? Or how do we make it so that it becomes carbon neutral, say 5 years down the line or 10 years down the line, or whatever your goal was, right? And so those are the strategic factors that influence network design. So if that's the case, maybe there are some suppliers that you cannot buy from anymore because of the way they produce their goods, or because of their carbon footprints, or maybe there are some suppliers that you want to now be in business with because of their carbon footprint and so on. So strategic factors have a huge role to play. Competitive factors, obviously. So if there is a brand new player in the market who's redefining the way everything is done. So imagine when Blockbuster was in its heyday, and Netflix came about. The first thing Netflix did obviously was not streaming services. Netflix also had DVD services where you could sign up online and you could ask for a DVD, and the DVD would arrive, say, a day or two later, maybe 3 days later, depending upon where you live. But then you never had to pay late fees. You could keep the DVD for as long as you wanted, but you never paid late fees. And that was not true with Blockbuster. So when that happened, Blockbuster had to completely redesign its supply chain. And we know that they did not do a good job because, well, Blockbuster doesn't exist anymore, right? So competitive factors play a huge are a huge factor in network design. And so with political factors, I'm not going to spend too much time on political factors, but as you know, political factors play a huge role. The regime in the United States changed, and the tariff structure completely changed, right? And so any foreign company doing business here, or any business that has a foreign component, has been affected. Some mostly adversely, right? So political factors play a big role. Of course, infrastructure factors. You need to have good roads, you need to have good trains or ships, depending upon what you're trying to get from point A to point B. You need to have reliable electricity, reliable water, and all of that. So infrastructure factors obviously play a big role in supply chain network redesign, right? So before we move on to making these network design decisions, let's try to build a framework around this decision. And then what we will do through the series of videos over the next few weeks is we will go through the different steps in this framework, and that's how we go through the supply chain network design, right? So to maximize overall profitability, while providing customer the appropriate responsiveness. Now, obviously, you'll notice that this is the objective for any supply chain. And this is what we saw in the last couple of weeks when we talked about how do you achieve strategic fit, right? There is a responsiveness spectrum and there was the uncertainty spectrum, and you were matching the responsiveness and the uncertainty spectrum, right? That's basically what this is also talking about. And there are many trade-offs that you'll have to do during network design, and that's what we will talk about. And we will use network models to go about this, right? So a variety of models that we can use to go through this, right? So phase one is to define the supply chain strategy. Like I said, you need to have a strategy, and this means that you need to articulate what do you want the response time to be, what do you want the product variety to be, what do you want the product availability to be. So all of these different things, you need to know what you want to do with them, and you also need to know that you cannot concentrate on all of them at once. You have to have one or two important pieces that you will concentrate on, and the rest you try to do the best you can, right? Say, for example, response time and product variety might not work well together. So if you have a lot of product variety and you have to design a supply chain that has to take into account a lot of product variety, it means that there are a lot of different parts, there's a lot of different suppliers who you have to deal with, so it's a possible for supplier risk, and that might mean that response time won't be that fast. So the value that you provide to your customer. So these are all the dimensions on which you are, on which a customer is going to look at the value that you provide to them, right? But you can only concentrate on one or two of these at a time if you really want to be in business, because if you're good at everything, then you're not great at the one or two things that you could potentially be great at. And that's something to keep in mind, right? So once we define a supply chain strategy, so apart from looking at the value that you provide to your customers, you also have to evaluate the cost of meeting customer needs. What is the inventory cost, transportation cost, facilities cost, information sharing cost, sourcing and pricing, and all of that, right? So broad supply chain network, define broad supply chain network to provide an appropriate level of responsiveness. So that's basically what you have to do. Right. So in phase 2, you define the regional facility configuration. So in phase 1, you come up with your strategy and say, hey, I want to get into the North American market. Or you say, well, I want to expand into the European market, or I want to move my production facilities from North America to Asia. So you have come up with some sort of strategy, right? Once you come up with a strategy like that, then you define your regional facility configuration, right? So you have to do forecasting, which we talked about last week. You have to identify all the different costs that are involved with it, identify any tax incentives and anything that you can get, identify who your competitors are, and identify this risk, right? Demand risk, exchange rate risk, and political risk, all three of them, right? So once you do that, you're ready to make a decision. And phase 3 is you set hard infrastructure requirements, soft infrastructure requirement, and finally you make the location choices and you figure out market allocation. So you basically say, okay, this is where I'm going to place my facilities, and this is how I'm going to allocate my market demand. So if I decide, okay, I'm a company that was primarily in Asia and I'm moving into the United States market and I've decided to place multiple facilities, I have to decide which facility is going to supply to the northeast of United States, which facility is going to supply to the southwest, which facility is going to supply to the south, the northwest, and so on. So you have to decide where exactly you're going to locate your facilities and how your overall market is allocated to those facilities. Again, we will talk about this next week. That's not what we're going to talk about today. What we're going to talk about. So I'm going to end this video soon, but today we will be concentrating mostly on the regional facility configuration, right? Once you come up with your strategy, you talk about regional facility configuration, and that's what we're going to talk about today, and the remaining we'll do next week. All right. So I'm going to end this video here. I'll see you all in the next video. We'll talk about a regional facility configuration. So the way I think about this is regional facility configuration is where you're trying to figure out, well, where do I locate a single facility, right? So you're looking at facility by facility individually. So where do I locate my individual facility? So this is a decision where you're making a decision of locating one facility, right? And once we move on to more complex network design models, the analytical models that we will learn can be used to figure out how you design a supply chain network where you're figuring out where to locate your production facilities, where to locate your warehousing facilities, where to locate your demand satisfying facilities, and so on. So there's a lot of more complex models that we talk about, but that is for a later week and not this one, right? So I'm going to end this video here, and in the next video we'll talk about locating a single regional facility. All right, I'll see you all in the next video. Take care.